What's up, everybody? Welcome back. As promised, if you're on Instagram and all that stuff, you saw us talking about an amp. Now, actually not originally, I'm on a guitar buying freeze. But you know what that doesn't mean? Don't mean I can't buy amps. So what is this big old mountain of rock and roll sitting over here? So this is a 1983 JCM 800 lead 2204. So if you don't know what any of that stuff means, yo, don't worry, I'm gonna fill you in, don't worry. And there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff, God I can't talk, about the JCM 800s. I'm gonna do a full video kind of on the history of Marshall coming up here real soon, because these are really fascinating amps, and the whole reason how JCM 800 even became an amp, it was like in 81, I think. So lots of really interesting stuff. And also, does anyone else feel like it kind of like cuts me deep that this is considered a vintage amp, like 83? How is that vintage? But when I think about it, I'm like, dang, that's almost 40 years old. It's closing in, and you know, 20 I believe is the criteria to be a vintage amp. So like I said, initially what happened was I've had a Rev amp sitting here for a long time, great amp, 100R. And it was never my amp, though. It was just kind of like, they just like, hey, do you want to check out this amp? And they just kind of left it here, and they finally needed it back. And I was like, oh, shoot, well, that looks like crap over here now. Just a giant open spot. And my wife was like, hey, you should get an amp to put there. Get a new amp. I'm like, you know what? I'm picking up what you're putting down. I like the way you're thinking. I should get an amp. And initially, I was going to look for a Vox amp. I was like, I've got the Marshall thing down. I don't need a Marshall. You know, I need a Vox or a high watt or you know, something. I was getting maybe a Bassman, you know, some kind of like different amp. And I went into the store from my old stomping grounds, a couple towns over from me, Metronome Music, and I just walked in there and I was asking my buddy Russ. I was like, hey, you guys got any like cool amps in here? And he, you know, he'd been out on vacation. He's like, you know, I don't really know what's in here right now. And I just happened to walk by and I saw this amp. I'm like, hey, what is this? And I look at the tag, I'm like, an 83 800. So of course then I text my buddy Michael, and I'm like, hey, dude, what do you think about this? And he's like, dude, you know, 800s, you know, Michael is my 80s metal brother. And he's like, yeah, those things are sweet, but you know, they don't have an effects loop. And I look at it, I'm like, dude, it's already been modded for an effects loop. He's like, that saves you money right there. You don't even have to mod it for an effects loop. And I asked them, I was like, hey guys, can I take this home for a few days and I'll bring it back if I don't want it? And they're like, sure, man, you know, take whatever you want. And so I take it home and I hook it up. And sure enough, amp, the light doesn't turn on. I'm like, what in the world? The amp doesn't work. I was so bummed out. Like me and Michael had been texting at this point, back and forth. You know, and it's funny enough, everyone I sent the amp to Michael, to Book, to Pete, to Sean, all my guitar buddies, they're just like, hey, those amps are good if you like, you know, Motley Crue and all that kind of stuff, but you need to do this mod to it. So, you know, I'm sitting here talking with Michael, I'm all hyped up on the amp, and it doesn't work. So I text Chris, the manager at Metronome, I'm like, dude, what's up? The amp's not working, dude. How do I get this thing to turn on? Like, what am I not knowing here? And he's like, oh, I forgot to tell you, the light is broken. It's on. Look at the tubes. They should be glowing. And sure enough, they were on and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, whew. I played one chord, played an A chord. Now, I have it run through the two notes, so it sounds a little bit different. But I ran it through my 2x12 over here, cranked that thing, and just go, oh, I didn't do that. I did this. And I immediately text Chris, and I was just like, hey, will you take this for the amp? Because what I didn't know about the amp, which really made it even more like, important to me, so I got junk all over me, was that this was my old guitar teacher's amp. I didn't know it when I took it home. He's like, yeah, that's Milo's amp, and I'm like, whoa, really? Like, so, you know, Milo is actually the teacher you guys have heard me reference and talk about all the time on here, who Milo was just, he's the guy that showed me scales, like wrote them out with the notes, not just the numbers and all that kind of stuff. Milo is like a huge influence on me, especially with the way that I teach. Milo is the best teacher I ever had. And so it meant a lot that this was his amp. He said he just had it, he hadn't used it in years and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, man, well, would he take this for the amp? And he was like, yeah, Milo said that's cool. So sure enough, I mean, it's here now, and I have been playing it constantly. It just has that sound. Sorry, my volume knob is not working the best on my Les Paul right now. It just has that sound. Les Paul, Marshall. Ugh! It sounds like all those 80s records that I remember. And you know, the mod that they kept telling me about is this treble mod. You know, Tom called it a trebleectomy. And there's that sizzle you can hear on the top end. If you listen when I strum a chord, you can hear it in there. Butchering that a little bit, but you can hear that little sizzle on there. They're like, hey, if you do this treble mod to it, it'll get rid of that completely, and it makes them sound, you know, a lot more rich and not so harsh. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to look and do that. I haven't done that yet. I wanted to do the amp and show it to you the way that I have been experiencing it. But honestly, I've been liking the amp so much, and the best part is, everyone always complains, show the clean channel of the amp. Ho ho, in your face. No clean channel, it's a 1-channel distortion rock machine amp. So I don't have to show any cleans. So here it is boosted with the Friedman Golden Pearl. That's one of my favorite kind of like overdrive pedals. I really like it. Now it's sitting on the amp, so it's going to be a little bit noisy. My cable doesn't reach far enough right now, but let's just kind of hear these lead tones with it boosted a little bit. Oh man, it's just like, it's that sound. It's the tone. Kill the boost, and it's right back into that. Like, so this is the main guitar on the track. No boost at all on that opening rhythm section. It's really bright. It's a very bright amp. And what happened was the bass guitar was the secret to filling everything out for me, which I mean, it usually is in like everything, not just with this amp. But the guitars just sat with the bass so well, and they just made this big sound, and I like that so much on it. So here was the Esquire, was that higher pitch guitar here. It sounded so twangy. This guitar was kind of hard to use because this pickup is a little bit microphonic. So if you heard those screams in the beginning of it, it was this. I can't make it. I think I had the boost on, and it might have been on just this pickup. The 335 on that solo, I liked it, and what was funny was I didn't use a boost on that solo because these pickups are so hot. of the things that my buddy Michael told me about JCM 800s is he said they are like the ultimate pedal platform. Like they just take pedals so good. And so that's why, like, for that solo section, sorry, this might be like a nerdy video. The solo section, I wanted to use the Strat, and I was like, I want it to sound like the amp is just blowing up. And I originally tried tracking it with just the boost on, and it sounded fine. It didn't have like enough, you know, like it was. I was like, no, it needs to sound more aggressive. And I was like, well, what about a fuzz pedal? So if you haven't tried one of these, and this isn't a sponsored video or anything, but the Dan Electro, I don't even know what it's called. Is it the Eisenhower fuzz? I'm not sure. Real gnarly sounding fuzz. And what I found was when I sat it on the amp, it made it really noisy, and it gave me the sound that I wanted out of it. Listen to it when I turn it on. Oh man, it was so hard to get a good take because it was just so radical and so out of control. And I was just like, hey, we are just going to roll with this thing. I gotta get set back right the way. But it was brutal. If you listen to that opening thing, see how it's hard to control it? There's so much noise. So to get a good clean-ish take to where the notes weren't all just like blowing up into each other, it took a lot. I don't know how many times I tracked that solo. It was forever. But without all that stuff on, the Strat sounded really good. I almost used the Strat over the Esquire to track. I thought it was more of a kind of like opposite to the Les Paul, but the Esquire just really, it had a bite to it that I wanted in So other than that, guys, that is the new old amp. You know, like I said, it feels weird calling it vintage because I feel like the 80s, that was like 10 years ago. But nope, it was like 40 years ago. So that's both exciting and depressing all at the same time, right? And, you know, you're going to see a bunch of this one. So thank you guys all so much for tuning in. You know, this is going to be a very welcome addition. It sounds different than all the other amps, so I can dig on it. I know a lot of people are curious about the origin, like, you know, hearing that one. They're two different amps. I don't feel like it'd be even right to compare them because this is more of that, like, plexi sound. This is the more 800 kind of thing going on. So you probably won't see a comparison video of those unless you guys really want it. And if you want it, then, you know, do whatever, I don't care. Other than that, have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you all on Monday.